The morning sun cast a pale, golden light across the tarmac of Naval Station Coronado. Its rays glinted off the rows of polished Humvees and the steel hulls of docked ships, turning the base into a shimmering, almost surreal battlefield of light and shadow. The smell of diesel fuel mixed with the brine of the nearby ocean, a smell Claire Dalton knew well. She inhaled deeply, letting the scent anchor her as she navigated the perimeter of the base in her dusty silver Corolla. She drove slowly, deliberately. Her eyes, hidden behind dark sunglasses, scanned the surroundings, every sailor moving with purpose, every officer striding through the corridors, every subtle gesture of routine was catalogued. This was not her first time on a military base, far from it, but today she was a stranger, anonymous, invisible. At the main gate, a trio of junior sailors leaned against a Humvee, smoking and whispering. Their laughter, low and immature, cut through the quiet morning air. "There she is," muttered the tallest, nudging his friend. "The new girl." "Bet she doesn't even know which way is the chow hall," the second added, smirking. Claire stepped out of the car, her movements fluid and unhurried. She carried only a small duffel and an aura of calm that seemed almost out of place among the bustling chaos of the base. Her boots clicked against the concrete, the sound steady, measured, and purposeful. The trio of sailors blocked her path, expecting the easy target they had been warned about. A civilian, maybe a timid administrator, someone who could be intimidated with a smirk and a few words. "Morning, gentlemen," Claire said softly, almost kindly, but the edge beneath her voice made the tallest sailor hesitate. "Step aside," she added, a simple phrase, calm, unthreatening, yet impossible to ignore. They laughed. "Or what?" one said, stepping forward. Claire didn't answer immediately. She simply adjusted her sunglasses, letting the weight of her presence speak. Her shoulders were straight, her movements deliberate. Even in stillness, she radiated control. The three sailors laughed again, this time a bit forced. But underneath there was a twitch of unease. They sensed it, a storm coiled within this woman. Claire began to walk past them, her stride unbroken. Her gaze was fixed forward, but her awareness was everywhere. Every whisper, every glance, every hint of arrogance was noted. She could feel the judgment of the three men, their assumptions, their contempt. It was almost quaint. "Almost." "Hey, new girl," the tallest called after her. "Lost again." Claire paused only slightly, then exhaled quietly, the sound almost inaudible. The tiniest smirk curved her lips as she replied, calm and steady. "Gentlemen, step aside." Her words carried more weight than any uniform, rank insignia, or salute could. The tallest sailor took a half step back, confused by the certainty in her voice. He glanced at his friends, who were equally frozen. "Whatever," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. Claire continued walking. She didn't need to look back. She didn't need to assert herself physically. The quiet power she carried was already unraveling the small web of arrogance the three sailors had spun around themselves. As she moved through the base, she observed everything. A young ensign struggled with a stack of papers, cursing under his breath. Claire noted the exact route he was taking, the corners where he hesitated. A group of SEAL trainees jogged past, dripping sweat, eyes forward, unaware that a presence they would later respect had already passed them. She paused in front of a display case of medals and commendations. Her hand hovered briefly near the glass, tracing the top row with her eyes. 3 high-level commendations gleamed under the soft lighting, awards reserved for the rare few who combined skill, bravery, and leadership at the highest level. Only one person on the Pacific Fleet had ever earned all 3. Only one person had the authority to command Coronado and make decisions that could ripple across the nation's security. Claire Dalton. But today she was just the new girl. Her phone buzzed lightly in her pocket. She checked it discreetly. Observation complete. Proceed to command wing. Time 900. She exhaled, tightening her grip on her duffel. Today's exercise was simple. Observe, listen, learn. Move through the base as any other civilian would and take note of weaknesses, strengths, and attitudes. It was rare for her to be invisible, rare for her to observe without influence, and she savored the moment. Then she heard the laughter again. The trio from the parking lot had followed her, thinking this was another chance to intimidate. "Hey, you again," the tallest called, "still lost?" Claire turned slightly enough for her calm, piercing gaze to meet theirs. Her voice, quiet but firm, cut through the morning air. "Gentlemen, step aside." This time, there was no mistaking the authority behind the words. The tallest sailor blinked, the edges of his confidence beginning to fray. Another step and Claire's hand lightly touched her duffel strap. A small gesture but deliberate. She didn't need a weapon. Her presence alone was enough. The three sailors froze, exchanging uncertain glances. Their laughter had vanished. For the first time, they sensed that their assumptions were catastrophically wrong. But they didn't understand why yet. Because what they couldn't see was the clock ticking on a far more dramatic reveal. 08:57. 3 minutes until the base's morning briefing. 3 minutes until Claire Dalton would shed the guise of anonymity and step into a room of officers who had no idea she was in their midst. 3 minutes until every smug assumption and whispered insult they had thrown at her would come crashing down. And she was walking directly into it. She continued down the corridor, each step measured, precise, almost hypnotic in its rhythm. The base around her was alive, but she moved through it like a ghost, observing, nodding, cataloging. The Humvee trio followed at a distance, their expressions shifting from confusion to unease. For 15 years, Claire Dalton had been trained to lead, to command, to see through arrogance and fear alike. Those who underestimated her were rarely given a second chance. And these three sailors, so sure of themselves, had just volunteered for a lesson they would never forget. She paused for a final glance over her shoulder. The three sailors stood rooted, mouths slightly open, their bravado evaporating like mist in the morning sun. Claire smiled just faintly, almost imperceptibly. The storm had arrived. And the base didn't even know it yet. She exhaled, her voice a whisper, though no one heard it. "They laughed at me once. They will not laugh again." With that, she turned back toward the command wing, every step bringing her closer to the reveal, closer to the moment that would redefine power, authority, and respect for everyone on base, especially those who had dared to underestimate her. The base hummed with its usual morning rhythm, but beneath the surface, an unspoken tension had begun to ripple. Sailors hustled across the tarmac, boots clanging against steel plates and concrete. Officers passed in clipped strides, briefing papers clutched tightly, coffee in one hand, radios buzzing in the other. Drones hovered quietly in the distance, scanning the waterline. Everything appeared normal. Nothing seemed out of place. Claire Dalton moved through the chaos with an effortless grace, blending in as though she belonged, and yet she stood apart. To anyone watching casually, she was just another civilian, walking purposefully toward an office, carrying a duffel and a folder of documents. But Claire's senses were on high alert, cataloging every movement, every pattern, every minor detail. The placement of a clipboard, the slight bend of an officer's shoulders, the way a trainee adjusted his helmet, all of it mattered. She paused at a glass case displaying the base's top honors. The 3 high-level commendations gleamed under the soft morning light. Claire's eyes traced each medal, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corner of her lips. These were awards she had earned, each one a testament to years of leadership, missions, and risks few could comprehend. Few even remembered the face behind those commendations because she rarely, if ever, appeared in public. Yet now she walked through the same corridors, unseen, unrecognized, the predator disguised as prey. As she turned from the display, a young ensign nearly collided with her. His stack of briefing papers tumbled to the floor, scattering across the polished concrete. "Sorry, ma'am," he stammered, scrambling to pick them up. Claire bent down, helping him gather the sheets, her fingers brushing his briefly. Her voice was calm, authoritative, yet soft. "It's all right. Attention to detail matters, even in the small things." The ensign's eyes widened. There was something familiar about her presence, a gravitas that didn't match her casual attire. He swallowed hard, trying to place her face in the mental archives of officers he had studied for briefings and military reports. Nothing clicked. And yet, he felt a ripple of unease, a sense that this was no ordinary civilian. Claire straightened, offering a faint nod, and continued walking. She didn't need to correct him or reprimand. Her quiet authority carried weight enough to make him rethink his assumptions. She reached the main operations corridor, a long hallway flanked by glass windows overlooking the tarmac. Sailors moved briskly inside. Officers whispered in groups. Screens displayed real-time training schedules, maps of deployments, and security logs. Claire observed all of it, making mental notes as she passed. Every routine, every procedural flaw, every inefficiency. Today, she was a ghost, cataloging the pulse of her own base without interference. Her path was suddenly intersected by the trio from the parking lot. The same junior sailors who had thought her an easy target now froze as she emerged from the crowd, almost ethereal in her calmness. "Hey, new girl," one said, stepping forward. "Lost again." Claire stopped and turned her head slightly. Her gaze, steady and unwavering behind her dark glasses, pinned each of them in place. "Gentlemen," she said softly, but with a weight that made their bravado evaporate, "step aside." The tallest sailor's smirk faltered. The words were simple, almost polite, yet they carried a force that neither threats nor aggression could match. A flicker of doubt crossed his face. "Or what?" he muttered, his tone shaky. Claire adjusted the strap of her duffel, her stance relaxed but unyielding. The slightest smile curved her lips. She did not raise her voice. She did not touch them. The quiet certainty radiating from her made them hesitate. For the first time since sunrise, they sensed they had misjudged her, though they had no idea by how much. Before the tension could escalate, the base's morning announcement siren wailed. A voice boomed over the loudspeakers. "Attention all personnel. Admiral on deck. Repeat, Admiral on deck. All hands prepare for morning briefing." The trio of sailors froze. Their mouths opened slightly, words caught in throats. The young ensign from earlier stiffened, recognizing the term, though he had no context for who the Admiral was today. Boots clanged as personnel scrambled into formation. Officers straightened in unison, and a ripple of organized chaos spread throughout the corridor. The sailors' eyes flicked from the large screens displaying the briefing rooms to Claire. A creeping dread began to settle in the pit of their stomachs. Their earlier assumptions, their jokes, their smirks, all of it seemed suddenly foolish. The Master Chief, a grizzled veteran who had seen every kind of scenario imaginable, emerged from an office and called out, "Admiral, the briefing room is ready. Teams are assembled and all personnel are on station." The three sailors exchanged frantic glances. They did not yet understand. They had no idea. Claire nodded subtly, as though acknowledging an unseen signal. She walked past them, each step measured, deliberate, commanding attention without demanding it. The Master Chief fell in step beside her, eyes darting nervously to the young sailors. "Ma'am," he said softly, "the teams are assembled. They're waiting." Claire glanced at him. "Good, let's begin." The young sailors were still frozen. Their jaws clenched as a sick realization settled in. The woman they had been mocking, the one they had underestimated, was not only in charge, she had been in charge all along. They had never seen her in uniform. They had never noticed her rank, her insignia, her presence at high-level briefings. They assumed that casual appearance, civilian clothes, and a quiet demeanor equated to weakness. They were wrong. Claire entered the command wing. The room was vast, filled with officers in crisp uniforms, captains, commanders, and unit leaders. Screens glowed with real-time satellite imagery, operational maps, and live training updates. Every eye turned toward the door as she walked in, yet no one immediately recognized her. They saw a civilian, not a legend. Claire paused at the center of the room. She removed her sunglasses slowly, deliberately. The gesture drew a collective intake of breath. The face beneath them was familiar to anyone who had followed high-level military operations, Pentagon briefings, or command decisions. Vice Admiral Claire Dalton. 3 stars shone brightly on her shoulders, a mark of authority unmatched in the Pacific Fleet. She let the silence stretch, letting the weight of her presence settle over the room. Officers who had seen deployments across oceans, trained hundreds of elite units, and coordinated high-risk missions suddenly felt the gravity of the moment. Even the trio of junior sailors, her early morning tormentors, felt their confidence crumble. Claire spoke, her voice steady, resonant, commanding yet calm. "Some of you met me this morning." She let the words hang, slow, deliberate, "and some of you made assumptions." Her eyes scanned the room, pausing just long enough on the trio of sailors to make them feel the full weight of exposure. Their nervous breaths echoed in their helmets, their eyes wide with shock. "Respect," she continued, "is not a favor. It is not conditional. It is not something to be taken lightly." The room was silent. The officers, the captains, even the Master Chief, were all acutely aware that this was no ordinary morning briefing. Something was different. Something was profound. Claire's gaze returned to the digital displays, the satellite feeds, the operational maps. But her presence alone made the room tighter, smaller. The energy shifted. People straightened. Conversations stopped. The base was holding its breath. The trio of junior sailors could barely process it. The new girl, the civilian, the target of their arrogance, was the Admiral, the commanding officer, the one responsible for every decision, every mission, every life on the base. Their laughter, their whispered taunts, seemed absurd in retrospect. Claire Dalton smiled just faintly, not cruelly, not mockingly, but knowingly. A storm was brewing, and the base, and especially those 3 young sailors, were in the eye of it. The corridor leading to the command wing hummed with quiet chaos. The scent of fresh coffee, paper, and sea air lingered in the hallways, interwoven with the distant rumble of helicopter rotors. Sailors hustled past, boots clanging against polished concrete. Officers carried stacks of briefing documents, tablets, and coffee cups. Nothing seemed unusual to an untrained eye, but subtle ripples of tension were spreading, almost imperceptibly, as Claire Dalton approached the main briefing room. The trio of junior sailors from the parking lot had tried to act casual, but their every glance betrayed panic. The woman they had underestimated, the new girl who had walked past them with effortless authority, had simply vanished into the building. Yet, every instinct they had screamed. Something was coming, and they were in the middle of it. "Hey, she's actually going in there," one muttered nervously. "Does she even know where she's going?" "She's different," said another, voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know why, but I can feel it." They didn't know what they were feeling, only that it terrified them. They had underestimated her completely, and for the first time they knew they were in danger, though they weren't sure from what. Claire Dalton moved as if time itself had slowed around her. Her stride was calm, deliberate, yet there was a weight behind each step that anchored her in a space far larger than the corridors suggested. Observing from the sidelines, it might have seemed like a casual civilian walking toward an office. But in reality, she was commanding attention without needing to raise her voice. As she neared the briefing room, she paused briefly to glance at a digital wall map displaying live feeds from around the base. Tiny dots represented personnel, drones, and vehicles moving in real time. Every detail mattered, and Claire noted the smallest deviations. A misplaced barrier, a distracted officer, a trainee walking with uneven posture. Everything was catalogued silently in her mind. And then the sirens began. A sharp, metallic wail cut through the morning calm. The entire base seemed to snap to attention. Officers froze mid-step, sailors straightened, and a uniformed voice boomed over the loudspeakers. "Attention all personnel, Admiral on deck. Repeat, Admiral on deck. All hands prepare for morning briefing." The words reverberated across the hallways, bouncing off steel and concrete. They were simple, yet they carried an authority no ordinary announcement could match. Everyone instinctively snapped to attention. The three junior sailors froze. Their earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced with a creeping sense of panic. "Admiral," one whispered almost inaudibly, "but she's just—" He couldn't finish the thought. The realization hadn't fully landed yet. The full truth, the sheer magnitude of the deception they had made about the new girl, was still forming in their minds. Claire Dalton's eyes flicked briefly toward the trio. No emotion betrayed her, but the Master Chief, standing a few feet behind, shifted nervously. He knew what would happen the moment their ignorance collided with reality. "Ma'am," he said softly, voice tight, "the teams are assembled, the briefing room is ready, everyone is waiting." Claire nodded, acknowledging him with a single, deliberate motion. "Good, let's proceed." The corridor seemed to contract around her, the air thickening as personnel instinctively fell into position. Sailors snapped to attention, officers straightened their posture, and the weight of expectation grew heavier with every step. The young ensign from earlier, still shaking slightly from their earlier encounter, followed her at a distance, trying not to draw attention. His hands were clammy, heart hammering in his chest. When Claire reached the door of the briefing room, she paused. For a single, suspended heartbeat, she was still the new girl, ordinary, invisible, harmless. Then she stepped through. Immediately, the room fell silent. Hundreds of officers, captains, commanders, and support personnel froze mid-motion. Their attention, trained to snap to ranks and insignia, focused on her. And yet no one immediately recognized her. Her civilian clothes, jeans, fitted jacket, and the braid over her shoulder were not the stars, the uniform, or the medals that usually commanded such attention. She looked deceptively ordinary. Then, deliberately, she removed her sunglasses. A collective intake of breath swept through the room. Eyes widened. Breathing faltered. The name whispered among veterans, the face rarely seen outside classified briefings and Pentagon reports, now stood before them. Vice Admiral Claire Dalton, commanding officer of the entire base, her three-star insignia gleaming in the subtle reflection of light on the glass walls behind her. The room seemed to shrink in the weight of her presence. Officers who had planned missions spanning oceans, coordinated high-risk deployments, and overseen hundreds of elite operatives now felt the gravity of the moment pressing down on them. Even the Master Chief straightened, lips pressed tight, knowing exactly what was coming next. The three junior sailors from the parking lot were frozen entirely. Their earlier arrogance, their whispered jokes, their assumptions, all had been illusions of power. They had walked past a legend without even recognizing her. And now, as the realization dawned, a cold wave of fear crashed over them. Claire's voice, calm and precise, cut through the stunned silence. "Some of you met me this morning." Her eyes scanned the room slowly, deliberately, letting each word linger. "And some of you made assumptions." Her gaze landed briefly on the three sailors. They shrank under it. The tiniest flicker of shame and fear passed over their faces. Their courage from minutes before was gone. "Respect," she continued, her voice steady, carrying over the room like a tide, "is not a favor. It is not conditional. It is not something to be taken lightly. It is earned through competence, integrity, and adherence to duty." Her tone was not cruel, but it was unrelenting. Every officer present, every enlisted sailor, felt the weight of the message. Misjudgments, small errors, lapses in discipline, all of it could be fatal under her command. The Master Chief, standing at her side, gave a subtle nod. This was more than a morning briefing. This was a statement, a demonstration, a reminder of the absolute authority she held and the consequences of underestimating her. Claire turned to the digital display behind her, showing live maps of the base, drone feeds, and operational updates. Her fingers hovered briefly over the screen, highlighting anomalies in patrol patterns and response times. Her mind cataloged everything, not just for the day's mission, but for the weeks ahead. The base would run differently under her observation, and she intended for every inefficiency, every lapse in judgment, every arrogant assumption to be addressed. The three junior sailors whispered to each other, eyes wide, voices trembling. She's the Admiral. No way, that's impossible. You saw it, look at her, that's Claire Dalton. The realization was sinking in too late. They had underestimated her, thought her a civilian, a target for mockery. They had been wrong, catastrophically wrong. Claire's eyes flicked back to the room at large, then settled on the Master Chief. Without a word, he understood. The morning briefing had just transformed into a test of discipline, respect, and awareness. Those who had misjudged her would be noticed. Those who had assumed wrongly would face the consequences, quietly but unmistakably. Today, Claire said, her voice cutting cleanly through the thick tension, we begin a new assessment of this base. Not of equipment, not of supplies, not of procedures alone, but of culture, of behavior, of respect, and of accountability. The words hung in the room like a storm cloud. Officers shifted uneasily. Sailors straightened nervously. The three junior sailors shrank in place, realizing that the day they had dismissed as ordinary had now become the day their arrogance would be tested. Claire paused, letting the silence stretch, long enough for every person in the room to feel the gravity of her presence. Then she added, softly but sharply, "And some of you are about to learn a lesson that will not be forgotten." The room trembled with unspoken tension. The base had been shaken not by an external threat, but by the simple, undeniable presence of the woman everyone had overlooked. Claire Dalton, the new girl, the Admiral in plain clothes, had arrived, and the repercussions of her observation of their misjudgment would echo throughout the day, through every team, every unit, and every sailor. The trio of junior sailors exchanged a glance. No words were needed. They had misjudged a storm disguised as calm, and now they were standing in the eye of it. The command briefing room was silent, the kind of silence that pressed against the chest, making it hard to breathe. Claire Dalton stood at the center, the faint glow of the digital displays reflecting off her eyes. For the first time that morning, she let herself relax just slightly, though not enough to diminish the weight of her presence. Officers, captains, and senior personnel were already seated, notebooks open, pens poised, but every one of them was frozen, not from fear, but from astonishment. Claire's gaze swept the room slowly, deliberately, landing on each face. She did not need to shout or demand attention. Her reputation did the work for her. The whisper of her name in Pentagon briefings, in mission reports, and in high-level strategic meetings had already traveled miles beyond Coronado. Yet today, she walked among them almost casually, like a shadow wearing human skin. The three junior sailors who had harassed her in the parking lot were still in the doorway, their faces drained of color. Their hands trembled at their sides. They had heard the announcement, seen the officers straighten, yet nothing prepared them for this. Claire's voice finally cut the tension, calm, precise, but slicing through the air like a scalpel. "Some of you met me this morning," she said, a slight pause, "and some of you made assumptions." The words landed like cannon fire in the room. The three sailors froze completely. The laughter, smirks, and arrogance of the morning had evaporated, replaced with stark, suffocating fear. They could not have imagined they would face this moment. Claire turned to the Master Chief, who was standing to her right, his posture rigid, eyes sharp. He was the only one who dared to break the silence with a subtle nod. That single gesture seemed to communicate everything: the room, the individuals, the gravity, and then Claire faced the officers. "Discipline," she said softly yet firmly, "is not merely the expectation of orders. It is the manifestation of respect for one another. And respect does not depend on rank. It depends on integrity, competence, and accountability." A murmur ran through the assembled personnel. Even senior officers shifted uneasily. They had seen many leaders, many command styles, many exercises. But the quiet authority emanating from Claire Dalton was unmatched, almost frightening in its clarity. Her gaze moved slowly back to the trio of sailors. Their eyes met hers, wide with disbelief and fear. Every second they realized that the new girl they had underestimated was not only the admiral of the base, she had been invisible and omniscient in her observation. Their every whisper, every small act of arrogance, every attempt to dominate her in the parking lot had been noted, catalogued, and remembered. Claire's voice dropped slightly, carrying both weight and precision. "Some of you," she said, letting the words linger like smoke in the room, "believe that youth or rank absolves poor judgment. That arrogance is a shield. That ignorance is excusable. You are wrong." The three sailors shrank back instinctively, unable to move, unable to speak. They were caught in the full realization of their mistake. Claire's attention returned to the room at large, to officers who were trained in strategy, who had seen missions succeed and fail, who had briefed presidents and generals. "Today," she said, "we begin a comprehensive assessment of this base. Not of our missions, not of our technology, not of our equipment, but of our people, our culture, and our behavior. We will observe, evaluate, and correct." Her eyes glinted briefly at the three sailors, "and that includes everyone." The murmur of nervous acknowledgement swept through the room. Officers scribbled furiously in their notebooks. Heads nodded. Some swallowed hard. They understood that Claire Dalton was not just speaking. She was issuing a challenge, a mandate, and a warning. The Master Chief stepped forward, his voice low but firm. "Admiral, shall we begin with the operational brief?" Claire shook her head slightly. "No, not yet. First, we assess the environment. We observe the dynamics that allow success and those that threaten it. I have already begun that process today." She paused, letting her eyes sweep the room again, lingering on the three sailors. Their faces were pale, lips slightly parted, eyes wide with the realization that every insult, every jest, every act of bullying had been catalogued. "You," she said, gesturing to the tallest sailor, "are under observation for initiative and leadership potential, but do not mistake observation for leniency." His throat went dry. "Why, yes, ma'am," he stammered. "You," she said, addressing the second sailor, "are under observation for teamwork and discipline. You will report to the Master Chief immediately after this briefing for reassignment and direct mentorship." The third sailor's knees trembled. "Ma'am." Claire held up a hand. "Do not speak until spoken to. Reflection begins internally." She turned back to the assembled officers. "This is not punishment. This is opportunity. Those who embrace it will grow. Those who resist will falter. And make no mistake, failure to meet expectations has consequences, visible and lasting." A tense silence followed. Every person in the room could feel the weight of her words. Even senior officers, experienced in decades of command, felt the pulse of unease. Claire Dalton's presence did not just command respect, it demanded it, and those who faltered under her observation were already beginning to feel the repercussions. The Master Chief stepped beside her, speaking softly. "Admiral, the teams are ready to move forward with the morning operational brief." Claire nodded, her expression unreadable. "Good. But remember, no procedure, no protocol, no mission succeeds without integrity and awareness. Observation begins now, and those who fail to recognize this moment will be made examples of." The trio of sailors could barely breathe. Their initial arrogance, their casual cruelty toward what they assumed was a helpless newcomer, had evaporated. They were exposed. They were humbled, and they were terrified of the storm they had invoked. Claire exhaled quietly, as if releasing the tension she carried with her daily. She looked at the young ensign from earlier who had been quietly taking notes. Her gaze softened slightly. "You are observant," she said. "Good. Never underestimate what you do not see." The officers and sailors now understood. This was more than a briefing. This was a reckoning. Every movement, every word, every action was being catalogued, analyzed, and judged. And the three junior sailors, the bullies, had become the first, unwitting subjects of her assessment. Claire glanced around the room one last time. Her voice, calm yet commanding, carried over the room. Respect is earned. Arrogance will be corrected. And every one of you, from the newest recruit to the most senior officer, will be held accountable for the integrity of this base. That begins today. The three sailors shrank back against the wall. Their earlier confidence, the jokes, the whispers, the sneers, all of it lay in ruins at their feet. They had thought they were mocking someone powerless, someone invisible. They were wrong, catastrophically wrong. Claire Dalton, the new girl, the Admiral, had arrived. And in that moment the base itself seemed to shiver under the weight of her authority. The storm had begun. And the first wave had already broken over those who had underestimated her. The briefing room still hummed with residual tension from the morning reveal. Officers and enlisted personnel alike remained stiff, as if their very posture could somehow absorb the weight of Vice Admiral Claire Dalton's presence. The three junior sailors from the parking lot had been quietly ushered to the side by the Master Chief, their faces pale, their earlier arrogance replaced by raw fear. For them, this day had already become unforgettable. Claire moved to the digital display at the front of the room, fingers hovering over a tablet that controlled the live feeds from throughout the base. Her gaze was sharp, analytical, yet calm. Every detail mattered. The timing of routines, the placement of personnel, even the smallest disruptions that might go unnoticed by an ordinary observer. Observation is the foundation of command, she said, her voice echoing in the room. You cannot correct what you cannot see, nor can you lead without understanding your team, your environment, and the consequences of misjudgment. She tapped the screen. Images from training grounds, equipment bays, and the tarmac appeared in rapid succession. Personnel moving, vehicles maneuvering, trainees performing drills. Each movement was catalogued in her mind, noted and mentally scored for efficiency, precision, and discipline. Captain Rivera, she called, her voice calm but unmistakably commanding. Bring me the status of all active teams on the deck and their readiness reports. Include anomalies or deviations from standard procedure. A tall, sharp-eyed captain immediately stepped forward. Yes, Admiral, he said, speaking briskly, fingers flying over his tablet. Team 1 has completed its morning drills. Team 2 is delayed by approximately 7 minutes due to equipment calibration. Training routines for Team 3 are on schedule, but morale indicators from the junior sailors are inconsistent. Claire's eyes flicked to the three junior sailors now standing uncomfortably near the back. Their shoulders sagged. The bravado of the morning had been completely stripped away. Her gaze lingered on them, not in anger but in measured scrutiny. Every twitch of discomfort, every gulp of fear was noted. Good, she said, voice even. Observation confirmed. But observation alone is insufficient. We must act to correct deficiencies immediately. She turned to the room, letting her presence fill every corner. This base will operate at the highest level of efficiency and discipline. Any gaps, any weaknesses, any failures in judgment will be identified and corrected. Starting today, I will personally ensure that every member of this team understands their responsibilities and the consequences of failure. A murmur ran through the officers. Even the most seasoned captains exchanged subtle glances. It was rare to see a leader combine calm authority with such penetrating oversight. Every word, every gesture, carried weight. Claire's eyes swept back to the trio of junior sailors. You will shadow Team 2 for the remainder of today. Observe, participate, and report every detail of your assigned duties. You will be evaluated not just for skill, but for judgment, discipline, and respect. Failure in any of these areas will be noted, and it will have consequences. The tallest sailor swallowed hard. Why, yes, ma'am, he managed. His voice cracked slightly, betraying the terror beneath his attempts to appear composed. You, Claire continued, pointing to the second sailor, will oversee inventory and maintenance logs for Team 3. Accuracy, thoroughness, and timeliness are mandatory. Do not attempt to cut corners. Do not attempt to argue. Do not attempt to evade responsibility. Observation begins now. The third sailor trembled visibly. Claire's gaze locked onto him for a heartbeat longer than necessary, enough to make him shrink in place. You will report to the Master Chief immediately. Your first task is to document all protocol deviations from this morning's operations. Understand them, correct them, learn from them. Now move. The three sailors, each pale and shaken, moved off in silence. Their earlier confidence had been shattered completely. For the first time, they understood the difference between appearance and authority, between arrogance and competence. Claire's attention returned to the larger room. Team leaders, she said, you will report to me with a full assessment of your respective units' readiness. Include anomalies, inefficiencies, and behavior that contradicts expectations. I will be present on the floor during your evaluations. Observe, correct, and improve. Officers nodded. Tablets and data feeds were consulted. Digital logs updated. Claire's presence alone created a palpable energy of urgency. Every person in the room understood that her observation was not casual. It was direct, personal, and unforgiving. Let's begin with a practical demonstration, she continued. Team 1, execute your first training protocol. I will observe directly, and you will report on every deviation, no matter how small. Team 2, you will adjust equipment to the standards outlined in the manuals. Team 3, you will conduct morale checks and behavioral assessments of all junior personnel under your supervision. The room moved in controlled chaos. Claire followed the operation feeds on her tablet, moving methodically from one area to the next, noting inconsistencies, praising attention to detail, and silently marking deficiencies for later correction. Even the junior sailors, now working under direct supervision, could not escape her scrutiny. Every misstep, every hesitation, every incorrect call was observed and noted in her precise mental catalog. One of the sailors accidentally misread a piece of equipment data. Claire's voice came over the comms, calm but cutting. Correction required. Reassess immediately. Accuracy is non-negotiable. The sailor flinched, cheeks flushing red. He corrected the error instantly, aware that Claire Dalton's observation was absolute. Meanwhile, across the base, Claire's reputation and authority began to ripple outward. Personnel who had not yet met her directly began hearing about the morning's reveal. Whispers spread. The new girl was the Admiral. The one they had underestimated, laughed at, or ignored. She had been commanding the entire operation all along. And Claire moved among the operations feeds, her focus unwavering. Every inefficiency was flagged. Every act of disregard for procedure was catalogued. And every person, from senior officer to junior sailor, felt the quiet but undeniable pressure of her scrutiny. By mid-morning, the first assessments were complete. Reports were submitted, corrected, and reviewed. The three junior sailors stood nervously in a corner, heads bowed, hands fidgeting. Claire approached them silently. "Do you understand why this exercise exists?" she asked quietly, her tone calm but unforgiving. The tallest swallowed. "Why, yes, ma'am." "Do you understand your failures this morning?" she continued. The second sailor's voice trembled. "Why, yes, ma'am." "And do you understand the consequences if you repeat them?" The third sailor nodded frantically. "Why, yes, ma'am, we understand." Claire's lips curved faintly into a small, almost imperceptible smile. Not approval, not satisfaction, but acknowledgement. "Good. Learn, adapt, correct. That is your task for the day. Fail, and the consequences will be public and instructive. Succeed, and perhaps you will begin to understand what true responsibility means." As she moved back to the command center, She tapped her tablet again, bringing up a live feed of the operational floor. Every movement, every interaction, every small correction was visible. The base was alive under her observation, a living entity responding to the hand of the Admiral who had walked among them as a ghost just hours earlier. And in the corner of the operations floor, the three junior sailors finally began to move with purpose. Tentatively at first, then with increasing attention to detail. The storm had broken, but the lesson had begun. Claire Dalton watched silently, satisfied. This was only the beginning. The day would test not just the juniors, but every team, every officer, and every sailor. And by the end, the base would understand one unyielding truth. She was not to be underestimated. Ever. The sun had risen higher over Naval Station Coronado, casting sharp light across the tarmac and illuminating every detail of the base's sprawling operations. Claire Dalton, Vice Admiral and Commanding Officer, moved through the operations floor with the measured confidence of someone who owned every inch of it, though to anyone else, she seemed almost ethereal, a presence both commanding and impossibly calm. The three junior sailors who had mocked her in the parking lot earlier that morning had been assigned to Team 2, tasked with meticulous equipment checks under her observation. Their earlier fear had not diminished. In fact, it had sharpened into a quiet desperation. Every movement, every word, every glance was now under scrutiny. One misstep, a hesitation, a misread gauge, a poorly issued command could draw her attention, and with it, a lesson that would be remembered for the rest of their careers. Claire paused at the edge of Team 2's operations bay, her eyes scanning the room with surgical precision. Machines hummed, digital monitors glowed, and sailors moved with the fluidity of well-trained units, yet each action was catalogued in her mind. She noted anomalies instantly: a misaligned tool tray, a slightly misread gauge, a sailor whose posture suggested distraction. Every detail mattered. "Observation alone is insufficient," Claire said, her voice calm but cutting through the hum of machinery. "Every error is a symptom of a larger problem. Correct it immediately and understand why it occurred. Fail, and you will be held accountable." The tallest sailor, now sweating despite the cool morning air, adjusted a gauge incorrectly. Claire's gaze landed on him instantly. Without raising her voice, she spoke over the comms. "Correction required. Reassess immediately. Precision is non-negotiable." The sailor froze, hands trembling slightly. He recalibrated the instrument, aware that every second was observed, every motion judged. Even the slightest hesitation could indicate a lack of competence, and in Claire Dalton's eyes, that was unacceptable. Moving further into the operations floor, Claire observed Team 1 executing their drills with efficiency but lacking cohesion in minor details. A captain overseeing a sub-team missed a small discrepancy in deployment timing. Claire's eyes flicked to him, unyielding. "Captain Rivera," she said calmly, "review the timeline of your team's deployment. Correct discrepancies and report back immediately. Attention to detail defines success or failure in operations. Understand the difference." The captain swallowed hard, nodding briskly. He had expected a routine oversight report. Instead, he faced the piercing scrutiny of an admiral who noticed everything, no matter how small. Meanwhile, the third junior sailor, assigned to Team 3, stumbled during a morale check with a small group of trainees. He misinterpreted a trainee's hesitation as incompetence rather than nervousness. Claire's presence at the edge of the observation zone caused his words to falter. Her gaze met his for just a second, enough to transmit the weight of her expectations without a single raised voice. "Reassess your approach," she said quietly, yet every syllable was laden with authority. "Empathy is a command skill. Leadership is not just procedure, it is understanding. Fail to understand and you fail to lead." The sailor's hands trembled as he recalibrated his approach. The lesson was immediate, visceral, and unforgettable. Across the floor, Claire continued her silent evaluation, moving like a shadow, observing everything without interruption. She noted the timing of drills, the alignment of equipment, the clarity of communication, and the subtleties of interpersonal dynamics. Every team, every sailor, every minor inefficiency was catalogued. As she paused near the control center, Claire noticed a senior officer issuing commands that contradicted standard protocol. She stepped forward, voice calm but authoritative. "Lieutenant, repeat the standard procedure. Ensure all units adhere precisely. Deviations from protocol compromise safety and efficiency. Do not improvise unless instructed by command." The lieutenant's face flushed. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, immediately adjusting his orders. Even seasoned personnel, veterans who had worked under high-pressure operations, felt the weight of Claire Dalton's gaze. Her presence was not punitive but absolute. Her expectations were clear, her standards exacting, and her observation unforgiving. The three junior sailors, under constant scrutiny, began to adapt slowly. Tentatively at first, then with increasing attention to detail, they corrected mistakes before Claire could even notice them. Each small success gave them a flicker of confidence, tempered, however, by the ever-present awareness that a single misstep could undo everything. Claire paused briefly, assessing the floor. She noted subtle dynamics, which team leaders delegated effectively, which subordinates displayed initiative, which units lacked cohesion. She made mental notes, preparing to address these issues directly during her debriefing. "Observation is ongoing," she said to the room at large, voice carrying just enough to reach multiple teams simultaneously. "Every action, every decision, every interaction is evaluated. Excellence is expected. Complacency will not be tolerated." The effect was immediate. Teams moved with increased precision. Leaders became hyper-aware of every motion, every word. The junior sailors, still pale and tense, began to understand the magnitude of their mistake. Their arrogance had been replaced with diligence, their fear now channeled into focus. Claire walked slowly to the center of the operations floor, her presence drawing the attention of every unit. "Leaders," she said, "prepare to submit reports on efficiency, cohesion, and adherence to protocol. Highlight areas for improvement and implement corrective measures immediately. The floor is now under direct review." Officers exchanged glances. Even those who had worked with Claire for years felt a renewed urgency. This was not routine oversight. This was active, detailed command, and she had observed everything, the good, the bad, and the negligent. The three junior sailors exchanged a brief glance. They had survived the first half of Claire's assessment, but they knew the second half would be more challenging. Mistakes would not be tolerated. Missteps would not be forgiven, and the shadow of her scrutiny loomed over them like a storm cloud. Claire observed the floor silently, cataloging improvements and noting inefficiencies. She made subtle adjustments, signaling senior officers to reassign personnel where necessary, suggesting refinements in procedure, and quietly reinforcing the principles of leadership, respect, and accountability. By mid-morning, it was clear that the base had shifted under her influence. Teams were sharper, more cohesive, and increasingly aware of the weight of responsibility. Even the junior sailors, once mocking and arrogant, were now fully engaged, operating under the pressure of observation and accountability. Claire paused at the edge of the floor, observing the changes she had initiated. Her eyes swept over the personnel, noting both progress and remaining flaws. Every misstep, every hesitation, every lapse in discipline had been catalogued, and the day was only half over. A faint smile touched her lips, not one of satisfaction, but of quiet acknowledgement. The base was responding. The lessons were beginning to take root, and the three junior sailors, once arrogant, were learning what it truly meant to face authority, scrutiny, and the unyielding standards of Vice Admiral Claire Dalton. By mid-afternoon, the base had been transformed under Vice Admiral Claire Dalton's watchful eye. The sun glinted harshly off the steel surfaces of the tarmac, reflecting a perfect mirror of the intensity she demanded from everyone. Claire moved with deliberate precision, each step calculated, each glance penetrating. The operations floor had become a crucible, a place where mistakes would be exposed, weaknesses corrected, and leadership tested. The three junior sailors, once mocking and arrogant, now carried the weight of fear and expectation. They had been reshaped by observation, by correction, and by the quiet authority of the woman they had underestimated. Every misstep had been catalogued, every hesitation corrected. Yet now, Claire prepared to push them further to see if they could perform under true pressure. Today, Claire announced to the assembled teams, we will conduct a full operational simulation. Every unit will execute maneuvers under time constraints, unexpected variables, and rigorous oversight. The objective is not merely success. It is precision, leadership, and adaptability. Failures will be noted. Success will be measured by adherence to protocol, initiative, and teamwork. The room was silent. Officers and sailors alike felt the weight of her words. This was not routine training. This was a trial. The tallest junior sailor swallowed hard. "Ma'am, what if we make a mistake?" His voice trembled, betraying both fear and uncertainty. Claire's gaze landed on him, unwavering. "Then you correct it, immediately, without excuses, without hesitation. Your performance will be judged on how effectively you handle the unexpected." The simulation began. Screens flickered to life, displaying scenarios across the base. Mechanical failures, communication breakdowns, misaligned patrols, and unexpected personnel absences. Every team was confronted with a series of escalating challenges designed to test their adaptability, precision, and leadership under stress. Team 1 executed their maneuvers with remarkable efficiency. Claire observed quietly, noting subtle errors in coordination that would have gone unnoticed under normal circumstances. She instructed minor corrections, her voice calm but exacting, guiding them toward flawless execution. Meanwhile, Team 2, including the three junior sailors, faced a simulated equipment failure that required rapid assessment and immediate corrective action. The tallest sailor froze for a fraction of a second, the magnitude of responsibility crashing over him. A wrong decision could compromise the entire simulation. "Focus," Claire said over the comms, her tone sharp but not raised. "Prioritize the problem, communicate clearly, act decisively." The sailor nodded, fumbling initially with the controls but gradually regaining composure. He issued orders, adjusted equipment, and executed corrections under the watchful eye of the Admiral. Every movement was catalogued. Every decision was scrutinized. The second junior sailor misread a secondary system, nearly causing a cascade failure in the simulation. Claire's voice cut across the room like a scalpel. "Reassess immediately. Precision is mandatory. Indecision is failure." He swallowed hard, corrected his error, and implemented the proper procedure under intense pressure. The exercise continued, escalating in complexity with unexpected variables. Personnel miscommunication, simulated equipment malfunctions, and emergency response scenarios. Through it all, Claire moved silently among the teams, observing, cataloging, and correcting. Her presence was constant, pervasive, and impossible to ignore. Even seasoned officers found themselves questioning minor actions, aware that nothing escaped her notice. The third junior sailor faced a challenge that required both initiative and ethical judgment. A simulated conflict between team protocols presented a dilemma: follow procedure rigidly or adapt in real time to prevent a potential failure. He hesitated, weighing the options, panic flashing across his face. Claire stepped closer, her gaze steady and unwavering. "Decision," she said simply. "Act." With a trembling hand, he implemented an adaptive solution, mitigating the simulated failure. Claire's eyes narrowed slightly, assessing not just the outcome but the reasoning, the execution, and the foresight. By mid-simulation, the three junior sailors were operating in near-perfect sync, a dramatic transformation from the brash, arrogant individuals from that morning. Their fear had been channeled into focus, their mistakes into learning, and their hesitation into decisive action. Claire addressed the assembled teams over the comms. Observation is ongoing. Every success, every failure, every decision is noted. This simulation is not just about completing tasks. It is about understanding leadership, responsibility, and accountability. The metrics are simple: precision, initiative, and adherence to protocol. Excellence is mandatory. Mediocrity is unacceptable. Across the floor, teams executed increasingly complex maneuvers, tactical deployments, simulated crisis management, emergency evacuation protocols, and intricate coordination of multiple units. Every action was scrutinized, corrected, and cataloged by Claire Dalton. Her quiet authority had reshaped the base's culture in mere hours. The three junior sailors faced their final scenario, a simulated mechanical failure that threatened an entire section of operations. Their previous training, observations, and corrections had prepared them, but the pressure was intense. Mistakes would be noticed. Hesitation would be punished. Failure could not be tolerated. The tallest sailor took a deep breath, issued rapid-fire commands, and adjusted the systems with precision. The second sailor monitored communications, correcting misinterpretations and maintaining clarity. The third sailor oversaw coordination with auxiliary teams, ensuring adherence to protocol while allowing for adaptive measures. Claire watched silently, cataloging every detail. She noted minor errors, a slightly delayed response, a misread gauge, but she also noted initiative, decisiveness, and teamwork under extreme pressure. The junior sailors had been transformed from brash and careless to focused, disciplined, and competent. As the simulation concluded, the room fell into a tense silence. Every team awaited her judgment, every officer aware that their performance had been meticulously scrutinized. Claire's gaze swept across the operations floor, finally resting on the three junior sailors. "You have demonstrated growth," she said, her tone measured. "You have corrected mistakes, adapted under pressure, and executed your tasks with precision. This is not praise, it is expectation fulfilled. Understand that excellence is the standard, not a reward. Complacency is not tolerated. You have been tested and you have passed this stage. There will be more challenges. There will be more observation, but this is a beginning." The three sailors, exhausted and shaken, nodded. Their fear had evolved into respect. Their arrogance had been replaced by awareness, and they now understood viscerally the weight of authority and responsibility. Claire's gaze moved across the operations floor, taking in the teams, the officers, and the entire base. "This base will operate at the highest level of efficiency and discipline," she said. "Observation is ongoing. Training is continuous. Excellence is mandatory. Remember this day, remember the standard, the expectation, and the consequences of failure. There are no exceptions." A quiet murmur swept through the personnel. Even the most seasoned officers felt the gravity of her words. They understood that this was not routine oversight. This was a fundamental restructuring of culture, discipline, and accountability. The three junior sailors exchanged a glance. They had survived the trial, adapted under pressure, and learned what it truly meant to be observed by the woman they had underestimated. But they also knew that this was only the beginning. Claire Dalton's scrutiny was relentless, her expectations absolute, and her authority unyielding. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the tarmac, Claire Dalton finally allowed herself a faint exhale. The base had responded. The lessons had begun to take root, and the three junior sailors, once arrogant, mocking, and careless, had faced the storm and emerged, humbled and transformed. Yet even as the day drew toward evening, one truth remained undeniable. The trial was far from over. The storm of discipline, expectation, and scrutiny would continue, and the base would either rise to meet it or falter under its weight. Twilight descended over Naval Station Coronado, the sky ablaze with streaks of orange and purple, reflecting off the gleaming steel of the base. The day had been long, grueling, and transformative. Every team, every officer, and every sailor had been tested, observed, corrected, and pushed to their limits under the piercing gaze of Vice Admiral Claire Dalton. Claire stood at the center of the operations floor, her figure illuminated by the last rays of sunlight filtering through the wide windows. She had been present for every drill, every simulation, every correction. Her presence, a constant reminder that complacency and arrogance were intolerable. The three junior sailors, once arrogant and mocking, now stood at attention, visibly changed. Their hands were steady, their posture aligned, their expression serious. Gone was the bravado of the morning. Replaced was a deep, visceral understanding of responsibility, discipline, and authority. Claire's eyes swept over them, piercing yet calm. "This day has been a test," she said, her voice carrying the weight of command. "Not merely of skill or knowledge, but of character, adaptability, and judgment under pressure. You have all made mistakes, some small, some glaring, but what defines you is how you responded to them." The tallest sailor swallowed hard. "Ma'am, we understand now. We were wrong about everything." Claire nodded slightly. "Acknowledgement is the first step, correction is the next, integration is the final stage. Today you have achieved the first two. You must continue to apply them at all times. Never forget what you have learned." She moved closer, the three sailors instinctively straightening even further. "Leadership is not given," she continued. "It is earned moment by moment, decision by decision, action by action. You may have begun the day thinking you could mock, dominate, or bypass authority. That illusion has been shattered. Understand this fully. Every act of arrogance, every misjudgment, every failure to observe protocol is a potential disaster." The second junior sailor's voice trembled slightly. "Why, yes, ma'am, we understand, we won't forget." Claire's gaze softened minutely, a rare acknowledgement of the effort they had shown. "Good. Fear can motivate, respect can guide, discipline sustains. Today you learned all three. Tomorrow you must embody them." Across the operations floor, other teams and officers had been gathering. They too had been observed, corrected, and tested under Claire's unyielding scrutiny. The murmurs of the day had given way to a profound awareness. This base operated at a new standard now, one defined by the exacting authority of Vice Admiral Claire Dalton. "Leaders," Claire addressed the assembled personnel, "this base's efficiency, cohesion, and operational excellence have improved markedly today. However, progress is only the beginning. Continuous observation, reflection, and accountability are required. You are all capable, but do not mistake capability for infallibility. Complacency is your enemy." Her eyes scanned the room again, briefly settling on the three junior sailors. "You," she said, "have learned lessons that many officers take years to grasp. Your journey is not complete, but today you took the first critical steps toward understanding responsibility, discipline, and authority." The third sailor, who had hesitated the most during the high-stakes simulation, bowed his head slightly. "Ma'am, we will carry this forward. We won't fail again." Claire's expression remained calm, unreadable. "I will hold you to that standard. Every day, every action, every decision. Authority is not a cloak to wear lightly. Leadership is not a title. It is earned and maintained continuously. Remember this day not as a punishment, but as a lesson you will carry for the rest of your career." For the first time that day, the tension in the room began to ease. Officers began exchanging nods, acknowledging the transformation that had occurred not only in the three junior sailors but in themselves. The base had been tested, reshaped, and elevated by Claire Dalton's presence and meticulous attention to detail. The three junior sailors looked at one another, a mixture of relief and lingering fear in their eyes. They had survived the day, adapted under pressure, and internalized lessons that would stay with them forever. Yet each knew that this was only the beginning of a career defined by accountability and excellence. Claire turned toward the Master Chief, her silent partner throughout the day. He nodded slightly, a subtle acknowledgement that the base had met a turning point. Claire then addressed everyone one final time. "This day will be remembered," she said, her voice steady and resonant. "Not for errors, not for mistakes, not for fear, but for transformation. Today, we took the first steps toward a culture defined by respect, accountability, and excellence. Those who have learned will lead. Those who resist will falter. Every action matters. Every decision has consequence. Excellence is not optional. It is mandatory." The base seemed to exhale collectively. The tension that had gripped the floor since morning gradually lifted, replaced by a sense of purpose and clarity. Officers and sailors now moved with renewed determination, understanding that every day would require vigilance, discipline, and commitment. The three junior sailors remained at attention, faces pale but resolute. They had been humbled, corrected, and transformed under Claire's observation. The arrogance of the morning was gone, replaced by respect, focus, and an unwavering awareness of responsibility. Claire's gaze lingered on them for a moment longer. "You were tested. You passed. But this is not the end. Every day, every mission, every operation will test you. Remember what it feels like to be observed. Remember the weight of responsibility, and remember the consequences of arrogance." Then finally she stepped back. A faint smile, just perceptible, touched her lips, not of triumph, not of satisfaction, but of acknowledgement. The base had changed. The junior sailors had changed, and the standard of leadership had been set. As twilight deepened, casting long shadows across the base, the three junior sailors whispered to one another quietly, their voices barely audible. We really misjudged her." The tallest nodded, swallowing hard. "And we'll never do it again." The third, still shaken but now resolute, said softly, "She changed everything." Claire Dalton watched silently from the operations floor, the weight of command balanced perfectly on her shoulders. The base had been tested, lessons had been learned, and the seeds of transformation had been planted. But one truth remained clear. Under her watch, complacency and arrogance would find no refuge, ever. And with that, she turned and walked toward the command center, her presence a silent promise that the lessons of today would endure, shaping every decision, every action, and every sailor at Coronado for years to come. The storm of authority, discipline, and respect had passed over the three junior sailors. They had survived. They had learned. And they would never forget the day they faced the Admiral, the new girl, who had commanded an entire base and in doing so transformed them forever. The end.